Keanu Reeves had always been known for his calm, mysterious aura, the kind that made him seem both untouchable and relatable at the same time. He was an actor with a fan base spanning millions, and his image was often seen in glamorous settings, red carpets, award shows, movie premieres. Yet today he was far from any of those. On a quiet street tucked away from the buzz of city life, there stood a modest little restaurant. It wasn't much by today's standards. No flashy signs, no trendy decor. Just an old brick building with ivy creeping up the walls and a cozy, inviting glow spilling out from the windows at dusk. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the smell of homemade dishes lingered in the air like a warm hug. This little restaurant had been a staple in the neighborhood for over 30 years, run by an elderly woman who was as much a part of the place as the worn wooden tables and the nostalgic photographs hanging on the walls. Her name was Ruth, a woman who had seen it all, the highs, the lows, and the moments in between. Despite the years, Ruth never seemed to lose her spark, always greeting each customer with a smile that made you feel like family. But her restaurant wasn't just famous for its food. It was known for its atmosphere. People came for the comfort of a hot meal, but they stayed because of Ruth's warmth and kindness. It was late afternoon when Keanu found himself walking through the door of this unassuming little restaurant. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside, the familiar smell of fresh-baked bread and sizzling meat filling the air. He wasn't sure why he'd decided to stop here, of all places. Something about the simplicity of it had drawn him in. Maybe it was the quiet charm of the place, or perhaps it was the idea of escaping the constant noise that followed him everywhere else. As Keanu stepped further into the restaurant, the chatter of the few customers inside fell silent. For a moment, eyes widened in surprise. Whispers of disbelief swept across the room. There, standing in the doorway, was Keanu Reeves, the man who'd saved the world on the big screen, who had charmed millions with his roles in action-packed blockbusters. But here he was just another person, just another man in search of a warm meal. Ruth looked up from the stove, her eyes narrowing in thought before softening into a smile. She'd seen famous faces before, but none had ever just walked into her restaurant without a fanfare, without the entourage. Keanu didn't seem like someone who craved the spotlight. He was just there, as though he belonged. "Well, I'll be," Ruth said, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached him. "What can I do for you, young man? Looks like you've found the best spot in town." Keanu smiled, his trademark calm demeanor evident in the way he held himself. "I've heard good things about this place," he said softly, his voice warm. With just a hint of curiosity, Ruth chuckled. "I'm sure you have, but don't expect any fancy dishes. What you see is what you get. I've been cooking the same way for years, and it's worked out just fine." The other customers, still a little stunned, tried to go back to their meals, though there was an unmistakable buzz of excitement in the air. Keanu was here. In their quiet little corner of the world, Ruth led him to a small table in the corner, away from the window where the last rays of sunlight fell. She grabbed a menu and handed it to him with a wink. "Take your pick, dear. We've got the usuals, meatloaf, pot roast, and some soup that'll warm you right to your bones." Keanu glanced at the menu, then set it down, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'll go with whatever you recommend," he said, leaning back in his chair as if he were already at home. Ruth raised an eyebrow, but smiled warmly. "I'll get you the special, then. It's a bit of everything, just like I do for the regulars. Something to remind you of home, no matter where you come from." As Ruth turned to head back to the kitchen, Keanu's gaze wandered around the room. The simple decor, the familiar faces, the laughter that echoed from a table where an elderly couple sat enjoying their dinner. There was something timeless about this place, something that felt right. Keanu had visited many places in his life, but there was something about this restaurant, about Ruth, that made him feel like he could stay here forever. The rest of the world seemed so far away, so distant in this quiet little corner. For the first time in a long while, Keanu felt at peace. But little did he know, this would be no ordinary visit. The actions he would take here, in this small, unassuming restaurant, would send ripples far beyond the walls of Ruth's kitchen, sparking changes neither he nor anyone else could predict. As Ruth returned to the kitchen, she glanced back at the table where Keanu sat waiting patiently. "He's a good one," she muttered to herself. "I have a feeling he'll leave here with more than just a full stomach." The restaurant hummed with the soft clinking of silverware against plates, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was the usual scene for Ruth's establishment, a peaceful, welcoming place where time seemed to move a little slower. Most of the patrons were regulars, the kind who came in for a hot meal and a quick chat. But today something was different. Keanu sat quietly at his table, absorbing the atmosphere as he sipped on his water. The quiet hum of the restaurant felt oddly comforting compared to the chaos of his usual life. The low-key nature of the place, without cameras, without fans, was a welcome change. He smiled as Ruth appeared with a steaming plate of her special. The dish was simple yet comforting, a hearty blend of roast chicken, mashed potatoes and vegetables, all seasoned just right. "This is perfect," Keanu said softly, looking up at Ruth, who placed the dish in front of him. "I'm glad you like it," Ruth replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's nothing fancy, just good home-cooked food." Keanu nodded, appreciating her honesty. He took his first bite, and the taste was just as comforting as the atmosphere. It reminded him of the kind of meal he used to enjoy when he was younger, back when life was simpler, and he didn't have the pressure of the spotlight weighing him down. He hadn't realized how much he missed this kind of peace. As he dug into his meal, the door to the restaurant opened with a soft jingle, and a new customer stepped inside. At first, no one took much notice, just another regular stopping by, for dinner. But when the man looked over at Keanu, his eyes widened in recognition. His lips parted in surprise, but he quickly recovered, his hand clutching the door handle tightly as if unsure of what to do next. Keanu's gaze shifted over to the man who was now standing frozen in the doorway. A few seconds passed before the man finally managed to step inside, his eyes flicking nervously between Keanu and Ruth. Is that really him?" the man muttered to himself, though it wasn't quiet enough for Keanu not to hear. Ruth, who had been observing the interaction from the kitchen window, didn't miss the moment either. She leaned over to her assistant and whispered, "Looks like we've got another visitor who's starstruck." Keanu smirked slightly, amused by the reaction, though he didn't let it faze him. He had gotten used to people staring or recognizing him in public spaces. But there was something different about this interaction. This wasn't the usual wild-eyed fan asking for an autograph or a selfie. The man standing in the doorway seemed hesitant, almost as if he wasn't sure whether to approach or leave. The stranger finally gathered his courage and walked toward Keanu's table, but instead of rushing to ask for a photo, he took a deep breath before speaking. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said, his voice uncertain. "I didn't mean to disturb you, but, are you really Keanu Reeves?" Keanu smiled and nodded politely, his usual easygoing demeanor shining through. "I am. Don't worry about it. I'm just a guy here for a meal like everyone else." The man blinked, a little taken aback by Keanu's nonchalant response. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly trying to decide whether to continue the conversation or not. "Well, I've seen all your movies," the man stammered. You're a big inspiration to a lot of people, especially in my line of work." He hesitated again, looking down at his hands, unsure of how to continue. Keanu tilted his head slightly, sensing that the man needed something more than just an autograph or a fleeting acknowledgement. He placed his fork down and looked at him, waiting. After a moment of silence, the man spoke again, his voice quieter now, more sincere. "I've been struggling lately. Life's been tough, you know. But seeing you here like this, it's kind of reassuring. It's like, if you can live a normal life despite everything, maybe there's hope for me too. Maybe things aren't as bad as they seem." Keanu's expression softened as he processed the words. He wasn't used to people opening up to him like this, especially not in such a personal way. He could tell that the man wasn't seeking fame or validation. He was looking for something deeper. "I'm not much different from anyone else," Keanu said gently, his voice low but full of empathy. "I've had my share of struggles too. We all do. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. What matters is how we pick ourselves back up and keep going." The man seemed to relax slightly, a flicker of hope replacing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Thanks, man. Keanu nodded, offering a smile that didn't carry the weight of his usual public persona. It was a simple, human smile, a reminder that even the most famous faces had their own challenges to face. But before either of them could say anything, Ruth appeared from behind the counter, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She eyed the man and then turned to Keanu, her expression as warm as always. "Everything good here?" Ruth asked with a raised eyebrow, clearly sensing the conversation that had just unfolded. Keanu nodded, his smile still in place. "Yeah, everything's perfect. Just sharing a little advice." Ruth's eyes twinkled as if she'd seen this kind of thing before. "Well, that's the thing about this place. You never know who's going to walk in, but you can be sure they're all going to walk out a little different. A little better, maybe." The man, now feeling a sense of camaraderie, smiled back at Ruth. "I think you're right," as Ruth turned to leave them to their conversation. The man lingered for a moment, looking back at Keanu almost as if he was searching for something more to say. But Keanu just gave him a reassuring nod, and the man finally returned to his seat, taking a deep breath, his posture a little straighter, his heart a little lighter. Keanu, meanwhile, sat back in his chair, picking up his fork again. The exchange had been brief, but it had carried a weight that was hard to ignore. Ruth was right. This place had a way of making people feel different, of making them feel seen. As the evening wore on, the restaurant continued its steady rhythm, and Keanu found himself settling deeper into the simple, quiet comfort of Ruth's world. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something unexpected, something that would soon change everything. The dinner rush had settled into a gentle hum by the time Keanu finished his meal. Ruth had been right about the food, simple yet satisfying, with a warmth that lingered long after the last bite. Keanu sat back in his chair, savoring the comfort of the meal and the calmness of the restaurant. For the first time in what felt like ages, he could just be. No schedules, no cameras, just a quiet evening at an old familiar place. But the strange thing about quiet moments is that they often come before something unexpected. Just as Keanu was about to get up and pay for his meal, the door to the restaurant swung open once again. This time it wasn't just a curious patron or a local regular. It was a woman, hurried and flustered, her clothes disheveled as if she'd been running for miles. She seemed out of place in the cozy, serene environment, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She paused for a moment as the door closed behind her, scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. Her eyes darted over the tables until they landed on Keanu, who was still sitting at the corner table. The moment their gazes met, she froze. Her eyes were wide, a mix of shock and desperation, as though she hadn't expected to find what she was looking for yet somehow had. "Keanu?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was unmistakable. Keanu blinked, unsure at first if she was addressing him, but as she moved toward him, her steps quick but cautious, it became clear she was. Something in the way she held herself, tense, urgent, gave Keanu the impression that she wasn't just a random fan. So this woman was here for a reason. He stood up slowly, his usual calm demeanor taking over, though his curiosity was piqued. "Yes, that's me," he said softly. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, glancing around the room as if unsure whether to continue. The few patrons in the restaurant had noticed the interaction, their eyes flicking back and forth between the two of them, but no one said a word. It was clear this wasn't just an ordinary moment. I don't know how to say this," the woman began, her voice trembling, "but I need your help. You're the only one who can—" Before she could finish, Ruth, who had been watching from behind the counter, walked up to them with a concerned frown on her face. "Is everything okay, hon?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The woman's gaze snapped to Ruth, her expression faltering for a second. Then, with a quick breath, she turned back to Keanu, her eyes brimming with urgency. "I can't explain it all here, but if you don't, help me. People are going to get hurt. They're already looking for me." Keanu's calm demeanor remained, but a flicker of concern passed over his face. This wasn't a normal request. It wasn't the kind of situation he was used to dealing with. He wasn't a real-life hero, despite what movies might suggest. But something about the woman's frantic state made him feel like he couldn't just ignore her. "What's going on?" Keanu asked, lowering his voice as he gestured for her to sit down. She hesitated for a moment but then nodded, sliding into the chair opposite him. Ruth, sensing the seriousness of the situation, silently backed away, retreating to a safe distance, but keeping an eye on the scene. The woman took a deep breath before speaking, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them on the table. "My name is Emily," she said, her voice shaking, "and I've been running from something. Someone." She looked over her shoulder once more, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "They've been watching me. I don't know how they know, but I think they've found me." Keanu leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "Who's been watching you? What are you running from?" Emily swallowed hard, clearly struggling to gather her thoughts. "I can't say much, but I was involved in something I shouldn't have been. I was researching something dangerous. I didn't know what I was getting into, but now it's too late. I didn't realize what I had uncovered until it was too late, and now they're after me. I don't know how much longer I can hide. They know everything about me." Keanu stayed silent, watching her carefully, processing her words. Something in her eyes told him she wasn't lying. There was fear, yes, but it was more than that. There was a desperation that felt all too real. She wasn't just asking for help because she wanted attention. She was asking because she had no other choice. "What do you need from me?" Keanu asked, his voice steady. Emily hesitated before meeting his gaze. "I don't know who else to trust. You're the only one I thought might help. I don't expect you to understand, but if they get their hands on me, they won't. Just stop with me. There are others involved, people who might be in danger because of this." Keanu didn't speak immediately. He glanced at Ruth, who was now watching from a distance, her eyes full of concern. The entire room had grown quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Keanu to make a decision. After a moment of silence, Keanu nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll figure this out. But we need to be careful. You can't just be running around without a plan." Emily's face softened with relief, but the fear in her eyes hadn't gone away. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Keanu stood up, his mind already racing through possibilities. This was nothing like what he had imagined when he walked into this restaurant to get a simple meal. He hadn't come here looking for an adventure. He hadn't come here looking for danger. But life had a funny way of throwing curveballs at the most unexpected moments. And now he was in the middle of something much bigger than a quiet dinner in Ruth's restaurant. He had no idea what was coming next, but he could feel it in his bones. This was only the beginning. Keanu's mind raced as he escorted Emily out of the restaurant, Ruth watching with a mixture of concern and curiosity from behind the counter. The air outside was cool, the quiet streets of the small town offering little in the way of distractions. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Emily's words echoed in his mind, her desperate plea for help still. "Fresh?" He turned to her as they reached the corner, keeping his voice low. "Okay, tell me more. Who's after you? What exactly are you running from?" Emily hesitated, looking around nervously, her eyes scanning the empty street. There was no one in sight, but the unease in her posture told Keanu everything he needed to know. She was clearly on edge, terrified even, and whatever danger was lurking, it was very real to her. "They're called the Vanguard," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "A covert group that operates under the radar, pulling the strings on things. No one understands. They control information, technology, and people, especially people who know too much." She paused, glancing over her shoulder once more before continuing. "I got involved with them by accident. I started researching some old documents about covert operations and government secrets, but I didn't realize just how deep it went. I thought it was just an academic project at first. But the deeper I dug, the more I uncovered, things that they don't want anyone to know. And now they're coming for me. They want the information back. And they won't stop until they have it." Keanu's brow furrowed. "So what's your connection to this group? How did you get pulled into it?" Emily's face tightened. "It started with a researcher I was following, someone who had left behind some encrypted files. I thought it was a conspiracy at first, but the more I uncovered, the more it seemed like there was something real behind it. I didn't know what I had in my hands until it was too late, and now they've been hunting me down for weeks." Her voice shook with the weight of it all. "I tried to go to the police, but they have eyes everywhere. The Vanguard's reach is endless." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of her words sank in. The Vanguard sounded like something out of a thriller movie, but Emily wasn't speaking like someone making up a story for attention. She was terrified. This was real. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. "Okay, Emily, we need to figure this out, but we need to be careful. You can't just stay out in the open like this. We need to come up with a plan somewhere safe." Emily nodded, but there was an edge of doubt in her eyes. "I don't know where to go. They've found me at every turn so far. I've been on the run for too long." Keanu's eyes softened with empathy. He could feel the weight of her fear, the helplessness that came from being hunted by a group with so much power. This wasn't some isolated incident. This was a serious, widespread operation. And now somehow he was caught up in it. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking hard. "Listen, we need to lay low for now. I'll help you, but we need to think this through. Let's head to my place, somewhere they won't be able to trace you easily. We'll figure out what to do next." Emily looked at him, hesitation still in her eyes. "But what about them? They're everywhere. They'll find me. They'll find both of us." Keanu smiled faintly, trying to offer reassurance. "Not if we keep moving and stay smart. The Vanguard might be everywhere, but they don't know everything. I have a few tricks up my sleeve that might help us stay hidden for a while." Emily stared at him, unsure but willing to trust him, if only for the moment. She didn't have any other option. She nodded, and together they moved swiftly, Keanu constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. As they walked through the dimly lit streets, Keanu couldn't help but feel like they were already being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and every passing car seemed to hold a potential threat. His instincts, honed over years of living in the public eye, told him that something was off. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia or if the danger was truly closing in. They arrived at his apartment shortly after, a quiet, secure building on the edge of town, far enough from the heart of the city to avoid attention. Keanu led Emily inside, locking the door behind them and ensuring the windows were secured. He motioned for Emily to take a seat on the couch, the air inside feeling heavier than it ever had before. The comfortable surroundings of his apartment felt like a stark contrast to the danger they were both now facing. Keanu paced for a moment, his mind racing. "Okay, Emily," he said, turning to face her. "I think we need to figure out exactly what the Vanguard wants with you. You've got information they're desperate to get back. But why? What did you uncover that's so important?" Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "It's not just about the documents. It's the connections I made. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the people involved aren't just names on a page. There are real people, real lives tied to what they've been doing. And if the public finds out, if the truth gets out, it could change everything. Governments, corporations, power structures, it's all connected." Keanu ran a hand through his hair. This was bigger than he thought. If what she was saying was true, the stakes were astronomical. But he didn't have all the pieces yet, and that unsettled him. "So we need to figure out how to protect you," Keanu said finally. "But first, we need to understand the full extent of what you're dealing with. Who exactly is behind the Vanguard?" Emily swallowed hard, her hands clenched tightly together. "I don't know everything, but I have a few leads, contacts I was hoping to meet up with, people who might know more about the Vanguard structure. The problem is they're probably watching them too." Keanu nodded. He knew they were walking into dangerous territory, but he didn't have much of a choice. If Emily was right, and the Vanguard was as dangerous as she claimed, the clock was already ticking. They were running out of time. Keanu knew they couldn't stay in one place for long, and they needed to move fast if they had any chance of uncovering the truth. The only question was, where would they go next and who could they trust? The night stretched on in uneasy silence as Keanu and Emily sat in the dimly lit apartment. The only sound was the occasional rustling of paper and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Keanu's mind churned, grappling with the gravity of the situation, Emily's story had all the markings of a high-stakes conspiracy, something he'd seen in the movies, but never imagined he'd find himself in the middle of. Keanu poured them both a glass of water, trying to focus on the practical matters ahead. But it was difficult to ignore the nagging sense that they were being watched. Every sound outside the apartment seemed louder, sharper, more threatening. The world felt too quiet for comfort. He turned back to Emily, who was still seated on the couch, her body tense, her eyes darting between the windows and the door. She hadn't stopped looking over her shoulder since they arrived. "Look, Emily," Keanu began, his voice calm but firm. "We can't keep running. Eventually they'll find us. We need to figure out how to strike back, how to turn the tables on them. But I don't know where to start." Emily looked up at him, her face pale under the harsh light of the room. "I don't even know if we can fight back. I don't have anything they want anymore. The information I found, I thought it was the key to bringing them down, but now I'm not so sure. It's too dangerous. They're too powerful." Keanu set his glass down on the coffee table and leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Then we need to figure out what they really want from you. Maybe there's something more here that you're not seeing, and if we know that, maybe we can use it against them." Emily's hands clenched tighter in her lap as she nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "Maybe, but I don't have the answers. I didn't think I'd end up in a situation like this. I never wanted to get involved with people like them." Keanu stood up, moving across the room to his desk. He began rifling through some papers, pulling up old maps, journals, and scribbled notes from his own past research projects. He'd worked on plenty of movies about spies, covert operations, and shadow organizations. But this was different. This wasn't a script. This was real. "We need a plan," Keanu said, staring down at the documents before him. "And right now that means we need to figure out who's pulling the strings. If the Vanguard's been operating in the shadows for this long, they've got to have a structure. There has to be someone at the top." Emily looked up at him, hope sparking in her eyes. "Do you really think we can find them?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He wanted to believe they could, but there was so much uncertainty. They were up against an organization that had been operating in secret for who knew how long. Whoever was leading them had the resources, the influence, and the cunning to stay hidden. But that didn't mean they couldn't be found. "I don't know," Keanu replied, "but we're not getting anywhere just sitting here. We need to take some risks and dig deeper. I've got some contacts in places I trust, people who might be able to give us a lead. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and we're exposed." Emily nodded slowly, her determination hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes. I can't keep running. I need to stop them before they hurt anyone else." Keanu looked at her with a hint of admiration. It wasn't just fear driving her anymore. It was resolve. In a world filled with people too scared to take a stand, Emily was willing to fight. And that made her a lot stronger than she realized. "We'll start tomorrow," Keanu said, standing up and heading toward the door. "I've got a few people who can help, but you need to stay low, stay hidden, and don't trust anyone we meet unless I say so." Emily stood up as well, her eyes flashing with a mixture of gratitude and fear. What if they're already tracking us? What if they've figured out where we are? Keanu paused, his hand on the doorknob. The question lingered in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their reality. He didn't have the answer. But he knew they couldn't keep hiding forever. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice quieter now. "We'll move fast, stay one step ahead, and when the time comes, we'll make them pay for what they've done." They exchanged a look, the gravity of their situation hanging over them. The Vanguard wasn't just a faceless enemy anymore. They were real, and they were coming for Emily. Keanu opened the door, stepping into the hallway with Emily right behind him. Every footstep echoed in the silence, every movement making Keanu feel like they were being watched. He hated the feeling, but he knew that it was just the beginning. The world had changed in a matter of hours, and everything he thought he knew about his life had been thrown into chaos. As they stepped out into the cold night, the sense of danger was palpable. Keanu had faced high-speed chases, close calls, and intense battles on screen. But this was something else. This was real, and he couldn't protect Emily just by playing a part. The moment they left the safety of his apartment, they were on there. So the next few days passed in a blur of tension and uncertainty. Keanu kept Emily hidden, moving her between safe locations and setting up encrypted communications with his contacts. There was no room for mistakes. The vanguard was closing. In and Keanu couldn't afford to slip up. Every second counted. They were playing a dangerous game, but Keanu knew they couldn't stop now. They had to expose the truth, take down the vanguard, and save anyone else who might be caught in their web. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be clean. But Keanu had always believed that some battles were worth fighting, and this one, for Emily, was a battle worth winning. The days had turned into a blur of whispered conversations, late-night drives, and constant vigilance. Keanu's mind, once preoccupied with his career and the easy rhythm of his public life, was now entirely consumed by the hunt for the vanguard. He had always prided himself on being calm under pressure, but even he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every sound, every passing car, every stranger's glance felt like a potential threat. Emily, for her part, seemed to carry the burden of fear like a second skin. Her eyes were always darting around, scanning for any sign that they were being followed. Keanu couldn't blame her. They had been on the run for days now, staying in random motels and unfamiliar apartments, moving every few hours to stay ahead of the people hunting her. But something had shifted between them in the last 48 hours. Emily had stopped being just the frightened girl seeking refuge and had become someone who was willing to fight back, someone who understood the gravity of what they were up against. There was a resilience in her now that wasn't there before, and Keanu couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with a contact of Keanu's who claimed to have information about the vanguard, they sat quietly in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The contact had been no help. He'd claimed he didn't know anything, but Keanu knew better. The vanguard had eyes everywhere. If someone was talking, they would know. Emily sat by the window, staring out into the night. Keanu couldn't help but notice how much her demeanor had changed since they'd first met. The terror was still there, but it was tempered by a quiet determination. She wasn't just going to let them destroy her life. Keanu broke the silence. "We need to find out who's really behind this. I don't think we're going to get answers from anyone else in this town." Emily turned toward him. "I know, but how do we even begin? We've already been to everyone you know, and they're all either scared or keeping their distance." Keanu leaned back against the table, arms crossed, considering the problem. "The vanguard isn't just a shadow group. They have connections everywhere, government, media, corporations. They don't operate alone. The people who run them, they've got to have a network. We just need to find the right people to talk to." "Who do you know that could help?" Emily asked, her voice hesitant. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he thought. "There's someone, but it's risky. This person doesn't exactly have the cleanest record, and they'll want something in exchange for any help. But if anyone knows how to navigate underground networks and get the real intel, it's them," Emily raised an eyebrow. "Do we have a choice?" Keanu smiled wryly. "No, we don't." He grabbed his jacket from the chair and headed toward the door. Emily followed closely behind, her hand instinctively reaching for her bag. They weren't sure who or what they'd find, but they knew they had to move fast. The vanguard was closing in, and they didn't have time to waste. The drive to meet this mysterious contact was tense, the silence between them filled with the weight of unspoken words. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, his senses heightened, his mind still working. Through the complexities of their situation, they had to get the answers they needed, answers that could bring the vanguard down or make them targets for life. The night was chilly as they pulled into a dark alley behind an unmarked building. The only light came from a dim street lamp, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Keanu parked the car, eyes scanning the surroundings. Emily was already on edge, her grip tight on her bag. "Stay close," Keanu instructed, his voice low. They stepped out of the car, and Keanu led Emily toward a metal door at the back of the building. He knocked 3 times in quick succession. The door creaked open, revealing a man who looked more like a ghost than a person. Tall, thin, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their arrival. "Keanu," the man said, his voice rasping as if it hadn't been used much. "I didn't expect you to come knocking." "This isn't a social visit, Joe," Keanu replied, his tone guarded. "We need information now." Joe stepped aside to let them in, his eyes never leaving Emily. "What makes you think I've got something you want?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Keanu didn't answer right away. He glanced over at Emily, who was standing quietly, her eyes scanning the room. They were in a cramped space, shelves of old books, faded newspapers, and a table covered in documents. The walls were lined with maps and scribbled notes. It felt like a safe house for the paranoid. "We're looking for the Vanguard," Keanu said, cutting to the chase. "We need to know who they are and how to stop them, and we need to know now." Joe chuckled darkly. "You've got no idea what you're dealing with, do you? They're not just some shadowy organization. They're the ones pulling the strings behind the scenes. Everyone's got a price, Keanu. You think you can just waltz in here and get what you need? Not without consequences." Keanu stepped forward, his expression hardening. "I don't care about the consequences. I need answers. They're after Emily, and I'm not leaving here until I have something useful." Joe's gaze flickered to Emily, his eyes narrowing as if evaluating her. "I can see why they'd be interested in her. But you're right, Keanu. The Vanguard doesn't just let people go. They'll keep coming for her. And for you too, once they realize you're involved." The tension in the room was thick, and Emily's heart raced as she processed Joe's words. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who might get caught in the Vanguard's crosshairs. Joe hesitated, then finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "There's someone you need to talk to, but be warned. Getting to them won't be easy. They're in the heart of their operations. If you want the truth, you'll have to go through hell to get it." Keanu and Emily exchanged a look. They were already in hell. It was just a matter of how deep they were willing to go to fight their way out. "Where do we start?" Keanu asked. Joe's lips twisted into a crooked smile. "I'll give you the address, but remember, no one walks away from the Vanguard unscathed." Keanu nodded grimly. "We're not walking away, not until we take them down." The pieces of their plan were beginning to fall into place, but Keanu knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. Every step closer to the truth was a step further into the heart of danger. But if they were going to survive, they had no choice but to keep moving forward. They left the dark alley, the night pressing in around them. The Vanguard's shadow loomed large, but Keanu was ready to face it head-on, no matter the cost. The morning after their meeting with Joe, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on Keanu's chest. They had the address, they had the lead, but they also had no illusions about the danger they were about to face. Emily sat across from him in the dimly lit apartment, packing the few belongings they had left into a small duffel bag. She looked tired, worn down by the constant moving, but her eyes were clear, focused. Despite everything, she had made up her mind. There was no turning back now. Keanu stood at the window, staring out into the streets below. The world felt normal out there. People walking their dogs, cars buzzing by, the hum of daily life. But inside this apartment, it felt like time had stopped. The quiet of the world outside only highlighted the danger closing in around them. "You ready?" he asked, turning to Emily. She zipped her bag with a sharp tug, then looked up at him, determination burning in her eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be." Keanu nodded. "All right, let's go." They left the apartment quietly, careful not to draw attention. Every time they stepped into the streets, Keanu felt the weight of every passerby's gaze, as if the Vanguard's agents were lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always just a few steps behind. The address Joe had given them led them to a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place you wouldn't look twice at, a warehouse-like structure nestled between a rundown factory and a boarded-up storefront. But Keanu knew better than to trust appearances. This was it, the heart of the Vanguard's operations, or so Joe had claimed. As they approached the entrance, Keanu's pulse quickened. He had no idea what they were about to walk into. Joe had made it clear that getting in wouldn't be easy. They had to be prepared for anything. "We stick to the plan," Keanu said, his voice low. "No matter what happens, we don't split up. We stay together." Emily nodded, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. "I know, I won't leave your side. Keanu pushed open the heavy metal door and they stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of rusting machinery. The warehouse stretched out before them, its walls lined with crates and shadows. It was eerily quiet, but Keanu knew better than to think they were alone. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching them. They moved cautiously through the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the concrete floor. Keanu's hand hovered near his jacket, where his gun was hidden, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. They needed information, not a fight. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft click followed by the hum of a hidden door sliding open. Keanu's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her behind a stack of crates, both of them holding their breath. A figure appeared. In the doorway, tall with a hood that obscured most of their face, they were flanked by two others, both carrying rifles. The Vanguard's security was no joke. Keanu and Emily waited, watching through the gaps in the crates as the group moved deeper into the warehouse. The figure in the hood stopped at a large metal door, typing in a security code. The door hissed open, and the three figures disappeared inside. Keanu exhaled quietly, his mind racing. This was it, the inner sanctum of the Vanguard, and they were about to walk right into it. "Stay close," he whispered to Emily. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows, using the crates and other debris for cover. Keanu's heart pounded in, his chest each beat a reminder of just how high the stakes were. If they were caught now, it would all be over, but there was no turning back. They reached the door the figures had entered through, and Keanu took a deep breath. There was no going in quietly now. They had to move fast. He pressed his hand against the door, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. With a steadying breath, he pushed it open. Inside was a maze of narrow hallways, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air smelled of chemicals and oil, and the low hum of machinery vibrated through the walls. Keanu didn't like it. There was something sterile and clinical about this place, like it was designed to hide something dark. They moved down the hallway cautiously, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Every door was locked, every hallway empty. But Keanu knew better than to assume they were safe. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with two guards, tall, muscular men dressed in dark tactical gear. Keanu barely had time to react before one of them noticed them. His hand shot to his weapon, but Keanu was faster. In one smooth motion, Keanu grabbed the guard's arm, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him into the wall. The other guard reached for his gun, but Emily was quick. She pulled a taser from her bag, firing it with pinpoint accuracy. The guard dropped to the floor, twitching. Keanu looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Nice shot," Emily nodded, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "Let's keep moving." They continued deeper into the facility, each step taking them further into the heart of the Vanguard's operations. The deeper they went, the more Keanu felt the oppressive weight of their presence. There were no windows down here, no way to tell how deep they were underground. It felt like the kind of place that could disappear off the map without a trace. They reached a door at the end of a long corridor. It was larger than the others, reinforced with steel and secured with a high-tech keypad. Keanu took a deep breath and placed his hand on the scanner. It blinked red before turning green, and the door slowly opened. Inside was a control room. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying footage from various locations, offices, streets, homes. It was a network of surveillance, all connected to the Vanguard's operations. But what caught Keanu's eye was the large desk in the center of the room, behind which sat a man, well-dressed, calm, with a cold expression that spoke volumes. He didn't stand when they entered. Instead, he merely looked up at them, his eyes icy. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. This was the moment. They had found the mastermind behind the Vanguard. "Who are you?" Keanu asked, his voice steady. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you already know." And with that, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Keanu's heart raced as the man behind the desk slowly stood up. His movements were deliberate, calm, too calm, for someone who had just been confronted by intruders. The cold, calculating expression on his face revealed nothing, and yet everything about him screamed power. This was the person pulling the strings, the person who had been orchestrating everything that had put Keanu and Emily in this nightmare, the Ray. Man's smile grew slightly, but it was the kind of smile that made Keanu's skin crawl. "I've been watching you both for quite some time. You've been making a lot of noise, Keanu. I didn't think you'd dig this deep." Keanu kept his voice low and controlled, despite the storm of emotions that were surging within him. "Who are you? What do you want with Emily?" The man's eyes flicked to Emily, who was standing beside Keanu, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. She hadn't said a word since they'd entered, her body tense, her grip on her taser still firm. This was her moment, too. This was the man who had haunted her life, who had turned her world upside down. "I am someone who can give you exactly what you want," the man said, his voice smooth like silk. "But the question, Keanu, is, do you want the truth? Or are you too afraid to hear it?" Keanu narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" The man walked around the desk slowly, his steps measured. He moved like he was in complete control, like the room and the situation belonged to him. "You're asking the wrong questions. The question you should be asking is, who is Emily? Why does the Vanguard want her so badly?" Emily stiffened, and Keanu could see her taking in the man's every word, every move. He could feel the tension rising between them. She had known she was special in some way, but this was something far bigger than she had imagined. "She's just a normal girl," Keanu said, his voice hardening. "She hasn't done anything to you." The man's smile faltered slightly, but then he laughed, a sound that echoed eerily in the cold, sterile room. "You're wrong, Keanu. Emily is anything but normal." He turned to her then, his gaze sharp, his voice turning colder. "You don't even know what you are, do you, Emily? You don't even know what the Vanguard has been protecting." Emily took a step back, her breathing quickening. I don't understand. What are you talking about?" The man's face softened just for a moment, as if savoring the opportunity to deliver his revelation. "You are a key, Emily, a key to something much bigger than yourself, something the Vanguard has been trying to control for years. But now," he let out a small chuckle, "now you've stumbled into a game you don't quite understand yet." Keanu's mind was racing. "You're saying she's important to you because of something inside her?" The man didn't answer directly, instead walking toward a bank of monitors on the far side of the room. He typed a few commands into the console, and the screens flickered to life. On one screen, a series of images appeared, surveillance footage, of Emily from different angles, some from when she was just a child. Other footage was more recent, but the dates were all over the place. Keanu's stomach sank. "What is all this?" "These are the moments we've been tracking," the man said, his voice now carrying a sense of pride. "The moments when Emily's power first began to manifest, the times she unknowingly altered the world around her. It's all here, Keanu, all of it." Emily's eyes widened in horror as she saw herself, unfamiliar scenes, faces she didn't recognize, moments she didn't remember. What are you showing me?" Keanu stepped in front of her, trying to shield her from the images. "Don't listen to him, Emily. He's just trying to mess with your head." The man ignored Keanu's protest. "You've always been different, Emily. From the moment you were born. The Vanguard has been watching, waiting, and protecting you because you hold the key to something unimaginable, a power that could reshape everything we know." Keanu's confusion deepened. "What power? What are you talking about?" The man's lips curled into a sinister grin. "The Vanguard is about control, Keanu, power, and Emily, she's the catalyst, the one who could either destroy it all or control it forever. That's why she's so valuable. She's not just a target, she's our future." Emily's eyes locked onto the man's cold stare. "I don't understand. Why me?" The man leaned in closer, his voice low and almost coaxing. "Because, Emily, you have the ability to bend reality itself. You just haven't realized it yet." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. "You're insane. You're telling me that Emily has, what, some kind of superpower?" The man nodded slowly. "Not just any power, a power that could change the fabric of reality." You think the things that have been happening to you, Emily, are just accidents? No. They're all part of what you've always had the ability to manipulate time, space, and perception. And now that you're aware of it, the world is watching. Keanu looked at Emily, his heart aching as he saw the fear in her eyes. Is that true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily shook her head, still trying to process the words, the impossible idea of it all. No, I can't. I don't have any control over that. The man's smile turned dark. You've only scratched the surface. But you don't have much time. The Vanguard will take you, Emily, whether you're ready or not. And when they do, they will use your power to make the world bend to their will. Keanu stepped forward, fury rising in him. You think you can control her? You won't touch her, not while I'm still breathing. The man didn't flinch. You think you're her protector, Keanu? You're just another pawn in this game. You won't stop us. Emily's hand tightened around the taser in her bag, but she didn't move yet. Instead, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. She wasn't the scared girl who had stumbled into this world anymore. She was stronger now, even if she didn't fully understand everything that was happening. She had come too far to let fear dictate her actions. Keanu turned to her, his expression softening. Emily, we'll figure this out. Together. The TCD man's grin grew wider. Together. It won't matter. Because in the end, Emily, you will be ours. And once you realize your true power, you will join us willingly. Keanu's heart pounded. This was it. The final confrontation. But Emily wasn't backing down. Neither of them was. We'll see about that, Keanu muttered under his breath. And with that, the battle for their lives and for the future was about to take a dangerous turn. The room seemed to close in around them, the hum of the machinery now a constant in the background as the man's words echoed in Keanu's mind. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest, but the fire in his eyes, the unwavering determination, never wavered. He wasn't going to let this man or anyone control Emily. Emily, her mind still reeling from the truth she had just been thrust into, finally spoke, her voice quieter than Keanu had ever heard it before. I don't want this power. I don't want to be a weapon. The man chuckled, his laugh cold and almost patronizing. You don't get to choose. Emily, this power chose you the moment you were born. You are part of something much bigger than you realize. The Vanguard has been preparing for this moment for years, and now the time has come. You can either join us willingly, or we can make you. Keanu stepped in front of Emily, his face set in stone. You'll never make her do anything. We're leaving here together. The man's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he slowly walked towards them. The air between them crackled with tension, and for a moment it felt like the entire world had come to a standstill. You don't understand, do you? The man said, his voice dangerously calm. You think you're protecting her, but in reality, you're only delaying the inevitable. The Vanguard's reach is too vast. There's nowhere you can run where we won't find you. Emily, standing behind Keanu, squeezed his shoulder gently. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was angry. Angry at herself for not understanding what she had been all this time. Angry at the world for thrusting her into this battle she never asked for. But most of all, she was angry at the man in front of her for thinking he could control her. Won't let you use me, she said, her voice growing in strength. I don't care what you say. I will never be a pawn for you. The man smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. We'll see. The truth is, Emily, you already are a pawn. The only question is, will you play the game, or will you let it consume you? Keanu looked at her, his eyes filled with fierce resolve. He knew the stakes, he knew what was at risk. But as long as Emily was by his side, as long as they were together, he refused to let her go. We're not playing any games, Keanu said firmly, and we're not giving up. A low growl reverberated in the air as the man's eyes flickered to a set of heavy steel doors that had remained closed until now. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind them, and within seconds the room was filled with more of the Vanguard's operatives, all heavily armed. The odds were against them. Keanu, Emily, the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. You've made your choice, but it's too late. This ends now. Emily's breath hitched as she heard the sound of weapons being cocked, but Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step back, positioning himself between the oncoming soldiers and Emily, shielding her from what was about to come. His mind raced. He had no plan, no backup, but he knew one thing. They couldn't let the Vanguard win. They couldn't let this man control Emily, or her power. And then it hit him. He turned to Emily, his voice a low whisper. I need you to trust me. Whatever happens, don't let them take you. Don't let them control you. You're stronger than this. Emily met his gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but something else too, resolve. She nodded, her grip tightening on the taser in her hand. She was ready to fight, not just for herself, but for Keanu, for the life they had built, and for the future they still had a chance to create. The man smirked, clearly amused at their defiance. You think you can defeat us? You're out of your depth, Keanu. This is far bigger than you, far bigger than both of you. Keanu's voice was steady. I don't care how big your organization is. We'll fight. We'll fight until we have no fight left. And then, without warning, the world exploded in chaos. The Vanguard operatives rushed forward, weapons raised, but before they could fire, Emily stepped forward. With a sharp inhale, she focused, her hands raised to the sides, as if trying to grasp the air itself. Keanu watched in awe as the temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air thickening, warping. The lights flickered as an invisible force began to ripple outward, distorting the space around them. The operatives hesitated, momentarily caught off guard by the energy that crackled in the air. In that split second, Emily's power surged forward. Her energy, a wave that threw the operatives back, slamming them into the walls with a force that knocked them unconscious in an instant. Keanu stumbled back, but his heart raced with a newfound sense of awe and terror. She had done it. She had unleashed something raw and undeniable. She wasn't just a victim of the Vanguard schemes anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, but the man in front of them remained unfazed. His cold smile never wavered. You have no idea what you've just unleashed, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ringing in the room. You think you've won, but you've only just begun to understand your true power, Emily. Emily's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breath. The air around them was heavy, thick with the remnants of her power. She felt drained but exhilarated, alive in a way she never had before. Keanu turned to her, his eyes full of admiration. Emily, you're incredible. But the man wasn't finished. You think you can fight me. You think you can fight the she. Vanguard? This power will destroy you, Emily, if you don't learn to control it. Keanu stepped forward, his voice low but unwavering. We're not afraid of you. We'll fight until the end. Emily met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just unlocked a piece of herself she didn't fully understand, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going down without a fight. With Keanu by her side, she would find a way to make sure the Vanguard never had control again. You've underestimated me, she said, her voice filled with newfound strength. And you're going to regret it. As the man's expression faltered, the sound of reinforcements closing in echoed through the hall. But Emily's power had already taken root. It was their turn to take control, and they were not going to let anyone, no matter how powerful, stand in their way.